Oda once said that when Shanks is appearing regularly in the story, that means that One Piece is in its final saga. And that's because it's clear now that Shanks is far more important than we ever realized. The final saga is going to revolve around Shanks more than any other side character, because Shanks was never just meant to be a mentor who helps Luffy grow into his role as savior of the world. No, Shanks himself is also destined to change the world, because Shanks is also the child of destiny. From the beginning of One Piece, readers in general, myself included, have underestimated the importance of Shanks, largely because after chapter 1, he doesn't show up in the story that often. But that is precisely because Oda is saving Shanks for the storyline that matters the most, the final saga. And what should have tipped us off from the very beginning that Shanks at the end of the story may almost play a sort of co-main character role is that when Oda says his favorite character is Luffy, he describes Luffy as being his ideal child. But in terms of who Oda views himself as, he views himself most as Shanks. Shanks is essentially Oda's self-insert into the story. So just because Oda removed Shanks from the story early on so as not to get in the way of Luffy's growth, that doesn't change the fact that every single time Oda has brought Shanks back into the story, it's always been to establish some sort of crazy hype and anticipation for the readers for Shanks' future greater involvement in the narrative, and then drawing Shanks back to keep preserving him for the end of the story. And in doing so, Oda has also built a lot of mystery as to what Shanks' actual role in this whole story of One Piece actually is, because our understanding of Shanks' role has essentially gone through 3 evolutions, and with this chapter 1152, we have reached our final evolution of understanding what Shanks' actual role in the narrative is. But before we get into it, have you noticed that my skin looks a lot better today than it did years ago when I first started my channel? I, like many other men, used to not really have a skincare routine, and so I would get breakouts on my face even in my early 20s. That led me down the rabbit hole of learning how to actually take care of my skin, so my face has been pretty clear for years. But the reality is that a lot of guys, including many of you viewers in this video, don't take care of their skin at all. And that's why your skin keeps getting breakouts, and why your face is probably aging faster than you like. Luckily, Manscaped, the sponsor of this video, has just released an all-in-one skincare kit for men. It takes away all the guesswork and gives you all the tools you need in one compact bundle. You get the Face Buffer Pro, which scrubs your face to remove dead skin. Then you use the exfoliating face wash that comes with it. And exfoliating is one thing that I know most guys don't do, even though it is absolutely necessary, because exfoliating cleans out your pores, and clogged pores are one of the biggest causes of why you get breakouts. And finally, you use a vitamin C serum in the bundle to brighten your face. And a hydrating moisturizer. Most men don't know that you need to be moisturizing your face daily, otherwise you're going to be looking like you're 40 when you're 30. So if you're a guy, just start taking a couple minutes out of the day to take care of your face. You'll stop getting breakouts and you'll look a lot younger in the long run. This is the most convenient bundle for skincare that I've ever seen for men, and you can get the kit for 15% off with my code MORGE. Just get the Skin Ultra Advanced Kit for 15% off with promo code MORGE at manscaped.com. Link in the description below. So early on, as of chapter 1, and really the first several hundred chapters of One Piece, Shanks' significance seemed entirely tied to Luffy. Shanks existed in chapter 1 as a way to sort of establish what Luffy is meant to aspire to become. Shanks inspires Luffy to become a pirate, he inspires Luffy to chase towards freedom, his dreams, his ambitions, and most importantly establishes certain themes that are going to be pivotal for Luffy for the rest of the story, namely of course that one must always protect their friends. And so as the story progresses, Luffy is sort of chasing Shanks' footsteps, and that's why every time we cut back and forth to Shanks at first, it's really just him monitoring Luffy's progress, like when Luffy gets his first bounty, and lots of times we get very significant Luffy scenes that are callbacks to the messages that Shanks taught him as a child, such as the bar scene in Jaya. So early One Piece, it's like, okay, Shanks exists because of what he represents for Luffy and Luffy's journey. However, then we reach phase 2 of our understanding of Shanks, which is that he seems to be playing this sort of grander, mysterious role of caretaker of Roger's will. See, what we became aware of is that there is this grander will, the will of D that needs to be fulfilled, also Roger's will. All of that is leading towards the One Piece being found and the Dawn being realized. But we begin to realize that for some reason, Shanks cannot be the one to do it. But at the same time, Shanks seems to have some sort of role that seems to be related towards facilitating this will of D being fulfilled. Because not only was Shanks apparently on Roger's crew, Shanks was passed down that hat from Roger, and then Shanks gave it to Luffy. So the passing of wills actually happened from Roger to Shanks to Luffy, meaning that Shanks himself was in a way a successor to Roger's. But the catch is that Roger said some final hidden secret words to Shanks that seemed to deeply affect him and break his heart. And after that, when Buggy challenges Shanks as to why Shanks doesn't step up and become the next pirate king after Roger, just as one would naturally expect Roger's successor to do, the wearer of Roger's Roger's hat. Instead, something has made Shanks feel that no, it is not the time for him to go after something like that. So there's some big missing piece that we realize as to why Shanks cannot be the one. And so then everything that he did sort of seemed to fall into this sort of caretaker role, at least in our minds. Shanks stole the Nika fruit, and he was traveling around in the East Blue, and I've even done videos breaking down why it's very likely that Shanks was actually looking for Ace to give the Nika fruit to, because he just happened to be at the island that Ace was at, and Roger had previously said that he hoped that his own son, aka Ace, would be the one who becomes Joy Boy. So it would naturally follow that if Shanks has stolen the Nika fruit and is at the island that Roger's son just happens to be at, and Shanks seems to be looking for some sort of successor to Roger, then he was actually looking for Ace to give the Nika fruit to, but the fruit actually ended up in Luffy's hands instead. But then when that happened, Shanks was kind of like, okay, well, nothing is an accident, we're gonna roll with this being destiny, because I believe this actually might be the correct destiny, and Shanks bets on Luffy to be the one that Shanks was looking for to actually carry on Roger's will, and Shanks looks out for Luffy as Luffy progresses towards becoming a great pirate. And during this time period, in keeping with the idea that Shanks is sort of the caretaker who is going to make sure that the one who is meant to fulfill Roger's will eventually reaches his full potential, Shanks, during this whole stretch of Luffy's development, also makes sure that the world's stability remains the same. Shanks tries to prevent Whitebeard from starting the Marineford War. Shanks prevents Kaido from getting involved in the war. Shanks stops the whole war once it was getting out of hand. He chases off the Blackbeard pirates before they can do any more damage. He knows that things basically need to be kept the same. And then only when Luffy awakens his fruit and begins to reach the potential of becoming the successor of Roger's will that Shanks was hoping for, only then does Shanks toss his hat into the race for getting the One Piece. So all of this kind of clicked into place, this idea that, okay, Shanks was never meant to be the one, but he took on the role of being the one who nurtures and guides the one into becoming his destined self. That's why, even though Shanks was the one who got Roger's hat, it seemed like Shanks was never meant to become the next Pirate King, why Shanks was crying during Roger's final words, while Shanks rejected the idea of becoming the next Pirate King when Buggy challenged him to do so. That's why Shanks showed no interest in going after the One Piece when Buggy was challenging him to do so, but Shanks then did show interest in trying to challenge for the One Piece only once Luffy had finally reached his potential, and why Shanks was so bent on keeping the peace of the world during that 10-year span where Luffy had to reach his full potential. So it seemed like everything about Shanks sort of made sense, right? Not the one, but he's going to guide the one to become who he's meant to be. And then we hit the final saga. Suddenly, Shanks' own story started to become much more important than we ever realized. The mystery of Shanks' birth became really, really important, and his family, the Figarlands, have turned out to become the most significant villain family in the final war of One Piece on the Celestial Dragon side. Shanks has a direct relationship to Emu. It seems like Shanks has the mark of Emu still on him. Shanks has been visiting Marijua. Shanks' own origins, which previously seemed unimportant, have suddenly become one of the most important mysteries in the story, and they've clearly become crucial to the war against the Celestial Dragons in general. The entire story of Elbaf in general has become extremely Shanks-centric, with this huge mystery surrounding the missing Devil Fruit of Elbaf being apparently tied to Shanks, Loki's entire storyline being directly tied to chasing after Shanks, Gaban being very focused on Shanks, Colin following in the footsteps of Shanks. The entire island storyline has become a non-stop running series of Shanks references and discussion points, along with, of course, the revelation of Shanks' evil twin brother, and the storyline in general beginning with Shanks one-shotting Kid, who we previously thought was going to be maybe the most important side character in the story, and then Shanks and his crew declaring war essentially on Luffy's Grand Fleet while actively preparing to counter the actions of the Blackbeard pirates, Oda dropping more and more hype tidbits around Shanks, such as the fact that he was the only Roger pirate who was ever able to learn Divine Departure, or Shanks' haki being hyped up to be comparable to Joy Boy's himself at the climax of Egghead. It feels like over the last 50 chapters or so, the entire narrative has shifted in a way to really emphasize the significance of Shanks, a lot of that without him even really appearing in that many chapters even now. And the final kicker of it all is learning at this point that he is in fact the child of destiny. This is absolutely huge because it shifts everything that we thought about the character on its head. Before this, for the longest time, it felt like Shanks is not supposed to be the destined one. It became his role and responsibility to sort of guide the way for the true destined one, Luffy, to become the successor to Roger and also naturally the successor to Joy Boy. But as it turns out, no. All of this emphasis on Shanks that's begun to develop more and more in the narrative, none of it has anything to do so far with his relationship to Luffy. Rather, it seems that Shanks is going to be an important character for the world just on his own. Shanks may not be the one who's meant to wear the hat, he may not be the one who's meant to have the Nika fruit, but Shanks' own destiny is going to be pivotal to bringing the world to its dawn. That is why the story is building up his significance so much at this point. And what's so interesting is that if I draw a comparison to another character who's been similarly built up for a long time, which is Dragon, the difference is that with Dragon, we know exactly what his role is. It's been made clear for a long time. Dragon is the leader of the revolutionaries who are actively trying to fight and overthrow the world government. But with Shanks, we've seen him so many times, we've gotten so many hints as to what he is meant to do, but this entire time he's the one that's truly been shrouded in mystery. One moment it seems like Shanks is just a pirate who values his freedom and wants to stay out of the larger political affairs of the world, and then the next moment it turns out that Shanks' origins as a child of one of the most important celestial dragon families is extremely important to the narrative. One moment it seems like Shanks is betting on Luffy to be the one to carry out the destiny of the world, and then the next moment it turns out that Shanks himself is also a child of destiny, destined to do great things to help bring the world into its dawn. And backed by popular demand, the World of One Piece poster collection is being made available again. The Villains collection is sold out, but every single island from the World of One Piece is available to get, all in fantastic minimalist art style, so you can complete your collection. All past deals are also available, so you can get any 2 posters you like and get another 2 free. You can get 15 posters at a major discount, or even the entire collection for a major discount. And if you complete the collection and have a poster of every island, then we will send you the final, exclusive, unlockable poster for free, the Moon. Just email us or tag me on Twitter with your photo of your collection so we can send you the Moon. So get your posters by hitting the link in the description below. So again, we had this sort of 3-phase evolution of the character. At first, it seems like Shanks is important because of what he means just as a father figure and a mentor figure to Luffy. Then we realize that there's a sort of greater destiny at play here, and Shanks is working to guide Luffy to be the one who can fulfill that destiny, and Shanks is carrying on the will of those who came before him, such as Joy Boy and Roger, by making sure that Luffy is the one who can fulfill this destiny. And in the process, Shanks is working to uphold the peace of the world until Luffy is ready. And then finally, we are at this stage where we realize that it's not just Luffy's destiny that matters. Shanks' own story and his own destiny is going to be pivotal to concluding the narrative of One Piece and presumably to bringing the dawn. And what I find so beautiful about all this is if you go back to what Oda once said about how he views Luffy and Shanks. Oda said that Luffy is like his ideal child, but Shanks is how Oda imagines himself. And it was established recently in Elbaf that Luffy considers Shanks to be his father figure, as Luffy said to Nami that just as how Nami views Bellemere, that's how Luffy views Shanks. And so if you think about this beautiful sort of 3-stage evolution of how Shanks' role in the story evolved, it really is a lot like a parent-child relationship. In the early phase of One Piece, when Shanks really just seemed like an important figure as a role model for Luffy to keep trying to aspire towards, before we really knew anything about the significance of the Yonko or the balance of 3 powers, that phase kind of symbolizes childhood. You don't really know that much about your dad or what he does, but you know the values that he taught you and you maybe aspire to be like him. Luffy seen at the bar in Gyre, reflecting the values that Shanks taught him. Luffy never allowing anyone to hurt his friends, just like Shanks taught him. No knowledge of Shanks as a Yonko. We, the reader, and Luffy, we don't know what a Yonko even is at this point in time. Shanks solely represents positive values and an ideal to aspire to for the first phase of the story. Then the second phase of the story, when we begin to understand a bit more of the will of D and what Roger is trying to do, and why Shanks seems to actually be trying to facilitate Roger's will by raising Luffy up to become the successor to the Pirate King's will, and that Shanks has this big job as a Yonko and he's trying to play peacekeeper for the world at large till Luffy is ready, that also reflects growing up a little bit. At a certain stage, you begin to understand what your father's job actually is, and you begin to understand why it's sort of important that they're raising you to follow a certain path. And then finally we've reached this third and final stage, which is when you're all grown up and you begin to see your father not as this parent, but as a person. This is the point in the story where we're actually learning who Shanks is. It was an interesting quote that Gaban said directly to Luffy at the beginning of Elbaf, that Luffy still only has a sort of idealized image of who Shanks is, but Luffy doesn't actually know Shanks, because it's now that we're beginning to understand Shanks the man. We're beginning to understand that Shanks has his own story, his own complicated origins. He has his own challenges, and he has his own destiny that is still playing out. Shanks is no longer this idealized mythical figure that is far away that Luffy is still trying to reach. Now is the time that just as Luffy is going to begin looking at Shanks as an equal, just as a child who has grown up begins to see their parent as a person with all the nuances and complexities of what that means, so too are we, the reader, now going to learn about Shanks' origins, his story, his struggles, and the journey that he is still on. And that's why Shanks had to be saved for the final saga. Because only now, after Luffy has come so far, is it time for Shanks to re-enter the narrative, because the boy has all grown up, and it's no longer a father-son dynamic. It's going to be 2 equals, and they're going to play out the final legs of their journeys side by side. 2 destined figures who are going to bring the world into its dawn. Luffy is going to be, of course, the one who really does it in the end, but it's been made clear now that Shanks is not just a guide. he is a child of destiny as well, and Luffy is not going to be able to achieve his destiny without Shanks first fulfilling his. And shoutouts to Rayonazar for correctly predicting that in chapter 1152, Luffy's group will be featured but won't make contact with Imu and the Holy Knights. Make sure to tune into Monday streams to get in on the chapter predictions competitions. And finally, we have a voice from the people, my top tier patrons. Harmony pointed out that Loki joining the crew would give Frankie a reason to create his version of Pluton to give them enough room. So this is a really interesting point because I have talked about in the past in multiple videos that I believe that Frankie is going to be converting the Thousand Sunny into Pluton. All the setup is there, they're at Elbaf where the Atom Tree is, it's time for the Straw Hat storylines from the past to come together, including Frankie's storyline. So if Frankie is ever to pick up the shipwright's will that's been passed down to him and finally make Pluton for the sake of defending the world, now would be the time. And that's very interesting because Luffy has just invited Loki, and one of the points is that Loki can't possibly fit on the ship, but that's technically only true if the ship is the size that it is right now. Loki could certainly fit on an upgraded version of the Sunny. So Oda may have just opened the avenue to that actually happening. However, I personally don't believe that Loki is actually going to become a Straw Hat. I've talked in the past how I believe that Loki's story may be a more tragic one than we realize, though a lot of that comes down to whether or not he actually has a special fruit. I've talked about in the past that Blackbeard might kill Loki to take his fruit, but now we don't even know if Loki has that fruit. So Loki's general future is very uncertain right now. I don't imagine him joining the Straw Hats. I do think that if Loki were to join the Straw Hats, it would disrupt the classic dynamic that we've had for a long time of Luffy, Zoro, Sanji. But this is One Piece. We never know. We never know what direction this character is going to go. I think it is a great point that technically Loki would be able to be accommodated on the ship if Frankie's storyline goes the direction that we think. So thanks for pointing that out. And with that, I am really looking forward to next week's chapter, so watch out for that, and I'll talk to you all next week.